I'm Dr. Judy Malinek. I'm a board-certified forensic pathologist, and I just watched the Nolan Wells press conference, and I wanted to share some context for everyone. Being able to definitively state the cause of death after a body has not been found for several days and has been subsequently autopsied twice with signs of decomposition is incredibly unlikely. Drowning is what's called a diagnosis of exclusion, which means that when you've got a fresh body, you want to be able to look at the body and see if there's any other causes of death for that body that is found in water that exclude the death being exclusively a drowning. So for example, if someone is shot and then thrown in the water, you'll have that gunshot and they'll be bleeding and the gunshot will be the cause of death, and the thrown in the water is not the cause of death. It's not even on the death certificate. If a person is strangled and they die from strangulation and then their dead body is thrown in the water, their body will take on water, but the cause of death is going to be strangulation, not drowning. Also for any kind of traumatic injuries. Now we got to talk about natural death for a second. If someone has a heart attack while they are swimming, and because they're having the heart attack as they're exercising in the water and they take on water and they drown, the cause of death is actually drowning, and the heart attack is listed on the death certificate under other significant conditions contributing to death. So even though the heart attack might have killed them on dry land, it might not have. Most certainly they wouldn't have drowned on dry land. So we defer to the hostile environment, which is the water, to call it a drowning. Now, identifying natural disease and identifying trauma is relatively easy in a fresh body. It can be very difficult in a decomposed body. His body was found 2 days after he disappeared, and this second autopsy done by Dr. Roger Mitchell wasn't until 4 days later. So we're dealing with quite a bit of decomposition, even if the body was refrigerated during that time. And then we have this other issue of the fact that not all the results are back. The toxicology would have been done on the fluids from the body from the first autopsy. From the second autopsy, you're going to have a lot higher alcohol levels from the decomposition caused by bacteria, not caused by drinking. So again, it's the fluid and blood from the first autopsy that really matter. And the other thing you have to consider, and there's one other important piece of information from that press conference, which is that the neck block, the portion of the neck from the front end, was missing. So Dr. Mitchell did not have a chance to examine that part of Nolan Wells' anatomy. Why is that important? Because if somebody is strangled, especially manual strangulation, the injuries are going to be to the front of the neck. There may be some redness at the back.
If you watch this entire video and still don't subscribe, ask yourself what that says about how much you really care about justice. Because this isn't just another case. This is a test. A test of whether we still demand answers when the system moves too slowly. A test of whether we're willing to sit with ambiguity until the truth emerges. 22 pages. That's the entire document released to the public on August 3rd. Within 24 hours, it triggered two completely opposite national reactions. One broadcast treated it like the massive breakthrough everyone had been waiting for. Boats identified, people visible, and a pool of potential witnesses finally stepping into the light. Meanwhile, a live stream commentator scrolled through the exact same file, page by page, and called it a nothing burger. His words, not mine. He argued it proved nothing, changed nothing, and shouldn't have been published in the first place. Same document, same afternoon. Two totally irreconcilable verdicts. So we did the boring work. We actually read it. What we found is that the debate isn't really about what's in the document. It's about what people wanted to find in it. Once you understand what each side was looking for, the outrage becomes entirely predictable. You're part of this now. You're the jury. You're the witness. And the question you have to ask yourself is this. If Nolan had been someone else, if he'd looked different, if his family had different connections, if the people in power had seen his face and recognized their own, would the investigation have moved faster? Would the answers have come sooner? The world looked away from cases like this for too long. Don't look away now. Every person who subscribes is a witness, and witnesses are what the dead deserve. Here is what those 22 pages actually contain. The file was released by the United Cajun Navy, a volunteer search and recovery group, not a government agency, who assisted in the search for Nolan Wells on Horn Island. TMZ broke the story on August 3rd, and local outlets like Fox picked it up shortly after. The group says they handed the file directly to the Jackson County District Attorney, the Sheriff's Office, and Nolan's parents, Christine and Elmore Wansley. But pay close attention to how the organization describes its own work, because they made sure to frame the narrative before anyone else could. First of all, I want to thank you for calling this report what it is, and it's a timeline, and some people have called it an investigative report, and that's not accurate because, as you know, we're not investigators, and what we did, Nancy, was we asked our followers, hey, if anybody was there that day, you have pictures, videos, whatever, send it to us just so we can go through it, see if there's anything relevant. We took all that information and compiled it into a digestible report of things we thought were relevant and could be helpful. Maybe they're not. Maybe law enforcement's already seen all this and it's nothing new to them, but we just wanted to be transparent about what we received. Think about what it means to have watched this far. You've heard the evidence. You know what's at stake. If you walk away now without subscribing, you're not just leaving this video, you're leaving Nolan's story to fade back into the silence it came from. That's not what you came here to do. Subscribe. Be the reason his name doesn't disappear again. That was Brian Trasher, Vice President of the United Cajun Navy, and he's doing something rare for a headline-grabbing case. Managing expectations. He clarifies that this file isn't an investigation. It's a crowdsourced compilation. After asking the public for any media from Horn Island on July 4th, they took the submissions, organized them, added coordinates where possible, and published the report. But here's the kicker. They didn't take a single one of those photos themselves. Every image came from third-party phones and social media uploads. That fact alone explains nearly every flaw or gap in the file. Remember that. We'll revisit it shortly. If you want more content focused on actual documents instead of commentary on commentary, consider subscribing. Now, let's dig in. The key image driving the coverage shows several boats anchored together. The report labels them as Boat Nacta 1, Boat Nacta 2, Boat Nacta 3, Boat X, the Palm Beach, and the Triton, the boat Nolan was on. Here's how national television interpreted that image. We used them to like Google Earth and satellite pictures of the island to try to determine exactly where they were. We looked at the initial coordinates called out from the Coast Guard or from Marine Patrol when the missing persons report first went out, and basically just try to run these pictures against each other to see, okay, this boat's here now, it's not here later, and again, just create an index. We had to use some software to help us create the index of the pictures and make sure we put it into the best timeline we could. We included social media posts that may or may not have been definitive, but these were happening in real time, so we thought it was important to put those up there to create context. These victims wait for justice. Nolan Wells is still waiting. The least we can do is make sure his story reaches as far as it deserves. Subscribe. Not for us, for him. Caitlin Becker from the New York Post put it best. While the boats are identified and people are clearly visible, the timeline is missing. We don't know the exact timestamp of the photo, nor do we know where Nolan was relative to the camera when it was snapped. That missing timestamp isn't a small oversight. It's the central flaw of the entire document, and it's a problem we're going to keep running into. With that said, let's turn to the opposing interpretation. One commentator argued that the report is essentially useless. I will never ever begrudge black folks and folks of color for saying they do not trust white people, and a terribly upsetting example of that is what happened to Nolan Wells. He spent 4th of July weekend with 3 of his friends, who he thought were friends, and they are white. He is black, and Nolan Wells died. We don't know what happened. I'm not going to speculate. That doesn't do anything for anybody. But we as white people have not given people of color, especially black folks in America, any reasons to trust us as a collective group of people. Full stop. That perspective is grounded in a real history, but it doesn't address what the document actually contains. Another commentator took the opposite view. These kids have been threatened and lied on. And why do you say lied on, Brandon? They have shown me evidence. I have seen and verified evidence. There's Life 360 evidence. There's CETO call evidence that proves what they're saying and that people have been lying about them so long that they need to take legal action against people. If this case stayed with you, if any part of this story hit the way it hit us, then you already know what you need to do next. Subscribe. Because Nolan Wells deserves to be remembered, and we can't do that without you. Here's the truth that both sides are missing. The report itself opens by setting its own terms. It says the useful move is to sort every piece of supplied material into categories. What is visually documented? What is reported by a witness? What is only annotated by a second person? That is not a dramatic framework. And it is exactly why the file reads as flat to anyone who opened it expecting a reveal.
The finding is a statement about limits.
The Triton is stated to have left the island at 4:31 in the afternoon, but that departure time has not been verified through GPS or through any other electronic record. That's a fact that has been collapsed in almost every retelling of this case, including by people who should know better. Take the video. 2 supplied screen recordings show phone interface clocks reading approximately 3:23 and 4:27, and the report goes out of its way to warn you about that. Because those are clocks visible inside captured social media content, they should be treated as timing indicators, and not automatically as verified original camera timestamps. Read that again slowly. Somebody filmed their own screen while a video played. The clock you can see is the clock on the phone doing the filming. That is not the same thing as knowing when the original was shot. And there is a detail underneath that one which nobody picked up at all. The report notes that the container metadata on 5 of the supplied video files shows creation and export dates in late July. Then it tells you plainly what that means. Those dates describe supplied digital files. They do not describe the July 4th events inside of them. What the organization received were copies of copies, reposts of reposts, which is precisely why the entire back end of this document is one long request for originals. You've come this far with us. Don't stop now. Subscribe. Be part of this investigation, because no case stays buried forever, and the next truth might be closer than you think. Take the boats. The report documents that vessel positions change. Front of Bayou and boat second are not where they were in an earlier frame. A later photograph gives a checkpoint after the stated departure, but the state cannot establish where they were, or who was aboard, or whether any of the negatives connect to the original. And then there is the geospatial section, which is the most technical part of the file, and the part that got the least attention. And honestly, that is a shame, because it is the most disciplined work in the document. They take the search datum from official coordinates, they convert it from degrees and minutes into decimal coordinates. They compare it against separately supplied map pins, and find the two sit roughly 1.5 meters apart, which they treat as the same location within normal GPS precision. A second spot from official correspondence sits about 279 meters away. And rather than build a theory on that, they write that the material does not establish what event that second point represents. That is careful work. It is also completely undramatic, which is exactly why it never made a single broadcast. Now think about that, because everything in this file orbits one window of time. Nolan's last independently corroborated sighting sits in the middle of the afternoon. Treston Shepherd was on the island with him, and said publicly in an interview on the Officer Tatum show that around 3 in the afternoon was the last time he personally laid eyes on him. The Triton is stated to have left at 4:31 after taking on water, without him aboard, and then the record thins out badly. There is a social media statement placing a group described as almost fighting at around 5 in the afternoon and saying a person with a blue top pulled out shortly after, moving fast. The report includes it. It also includes the reply that disputes it from someone saying the person involved was not Nolan. The report does not resolve that. It flags it and leaves it standing, and that is the correct call, even though it is unsatisfying because a contested account cannot be nailed down as a fixed point on a timeline. You cannot build on ground that is still moving. Every subscription is a promise that we will keep digging, that we will not let these cases go cold again, and I need you to make that promise right now. Then comes the 7:30 observation, and this is where a lot of online coverage has gone sideways. A woman named Kaylin, who was on the island that day, photographed the vessel and stated that Nolan was nowhere in sight when her group left around 7:30 in the evening. Now, read that the way the report reads it. That is a statement about visibility. It is not a statement about location. Not being seen in one area by one group at one moment is not the same as not being on the island. Those are two very different claims, and only one of them was actually made. The document treats it exactly right. A reported observation, not a confirmed sighting, and not a confirmed absence. Nolan Wells was recovered from the water just off Horn Island on the morning of July 6th. Between the mid-afternoon and the evening of July 4th, the public record has a hole in it. That is the finding. That is the whole finding. Everything else in 22 pages is the work of describing the edges of that hole as precisely as possible. Look at what it recommends, and the design becomes obvious. Get phone and location data. Get vessel GPS and engine records. Get a complete passenger roster for every boat, including that one. Nobody who thinks they have solved something writes that list. That is a document telling investigators which doors are still shut, and exactly which keys open them. Brian Fitzgibbons of USA Nationwide Security on the same broadcast put it in the cleanest terms anyone managed. The value is in providing a framework to build an investigation off of, not the answer. The scaffolding you need before an answer is even possible. The only way stories like this continue to be told is if people like you choose to care. And if you're still watching, I know you care. But caring isn't enough. Caring has to mean something. Caring has to lead to action. Subscribe. And he raised one more thing that deserves more attention than it got. Nobody on that island knew they were a witness at the time. There was no gunshot, no explosion, no moment that told 200 people to look up and start remembering. It was a holiday. People were in the water with drinks in their hands. Nobody was checking a watch because there was nothing yet to check again. So when accounts conflict on timing, that is not evidence of a cover-up. That is evidence of memory working the way memory works. And this is giving us maybe the sharpest lesson of the entire document. The thing that should actually make you suspicious is not inconsistency. It's the opposite. Multiple witnesses giving exactly the same times, same sequence, same phrasing. That would be the thing worth being suspicious about. Here is where all of this leaves us. A volunteer organization asked the public for material. They gathered it, organized it, and released a document that is mostly a timeline and an honest account of everything the material cannot prove. It is now in the hands of the district attorney, the sheriff's office, and the family. The family has retained attorney Ben Crump, whose team is running an independent investigation. And there is one more piece of context that makes this whole thing land differently. The information environment around this case has already produced fabricated material. On August 1st, Mississippi Department of Public Safety Commissioner Sean Tindall publicly addressed a purported toxicology report attributed to Nolan Wells and stated it was fraudulent. Sit with that for a second. Documents are already being manufactured in this case and passed around as real, which means a 22-page file that repeatedly, almost stubbornly, tells you what it cannot prove is worth considerably more than it first looks, not less. You stayed until the end. You heard his name. You heard his mother's pain. Now do the only thing that makes sense. Subscribe, because Nolan Wells deserves to be remembered, and we can't do that without you. In an environment full of confident answers, the document that admits its own limits is the unusual one. The gap between afternoon and evening on July 4th is still open. Closing it will take original files, device data, vessel records, and a complete accounting of who was actually in that cove. Until that exists in the public record, everything else, the broadcasts, the live streams, this video, is interpretation. We'll keep following the source material as it develops. If you want the next update when it drops, subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks for being here. Now, before we go, let's talk about what this document actually means for the investigation going forward. Because the report's true value isn't in what it proves, it's in what it clarifies. The document identifies 3 categories of evidence that still need to be obtained: original phone data from everyone who was on that island, vessel GPS records that could confirm or contradict the stated timeline, and a complete roster of who was on every boat in that cove on July 4th. Those aren't small requests. They're the foundation of any serious investigation. And the fact that they still haven't been obtained, more than a month after Nolan's body was found, tells you everything about where this case actually stands. The United Cajun Navy did what law enforcement should have done weeks ago. They asked the public for evidence. They compiled it. They released it. They created a framework for accountability. Now, the question is, what happens next? Will investigators follow the leads this document has identified? Will the phone inspection finally happen? Will the GPS records be obtained? Will the state autopsy be released? Or will this case join the long list of others that faded from public view before the truth ever came out? These stories wait for someone to tell them. The least we can do is make sure they reach as far as they deserve. Subscribe, not for us, for them. For every young person who never got to tell their own story. The answer to that question depends on something that has nothing to do with evidence, or investigators, or the legal system. It depends on whether people like you continue to care, continue to watch, continue to demand answers. That's what subscribing means. It's not a favor to us. It's a promise. A promise that you will keep watching, that you will keep caring, that you will keep demanding answers until justice is done. So I'm asking you, not for me, not for this channel, for Nolan, for his mother Christine, for every family that's still waiting for answers, for every young person who never got to tell their own story. Subscribed, because no case stays cold forever, and the next truth might be closer than you think. We'll see you in the next one.